Confederate monuments in the South are not a creature of the immediate post-Civil War era. Our monument in Lowndes County, for example, was put on our courthouse in 1911. It was, and as are most of them, product of the 20th century. It was an effort after the onset of Jim Crow segregation to help reinforce racial policy after Reconstruction ended. They had very little to do with the actual Civil War, and instead had more to do with white supremacy as it was lived in the first 3 decades of the 20th century. For example, our statue in Lowndes County comes in 1911. 4 years later, we get the movie Birth of a Nation. We get the founding of the new Ku Klux Klan, which is going to be incredibly popular in this part of the country and which will dominate for several decades. It was all part of the same effort. This statue in Lowndes County, as all the statues on the courthouse lawns of counties across the South, were put there by the United Daughters of the Confederacy, one of these groups that was perpetuating what we know as the Lost Cause, a celebration of all things antebellum and Confederate as being virtuous. The United Daughters of the Confederacy were a national organization headquartered in the South, obviously. They were allied with other groups like Sons of Confederate Veterans, another group that's still around. They often would get financing after 1915 from various Klan-affiliated groups or the Ku Klux Klan. They were part of a broader lost cause ideology, and so all of the unabashed white supremacists that we think of when we think of the first 3 decades of the 20th century in the South were all part of the ideological and financial project of the United Daughters of the Confederacy and of the Lost Cause more broadly, to prop up this idea that the South was once great and had its greatness taken away from it, largely because of black participation in society. And the narrative went that things in the South were so much better before the Civil War, and that it was the attack of Northerners on quote-unquote our way of life that ended up destroying the South. It was a way to explain the South's incredibly poor economy, its incredibly poor educational system. The South lagged behind in almost every category, as it kind of still does. And one of the ways to kind of fix that, or at least to kind of make an excuse for that, was to blame the Civil War and was to blame Northern aggression. And so everything about the antebellum South was venerated. Of course, that narrative was entirely false. The South before the Civil War was just as poor as it was after it, if not more so. The South was an oligarchy run by a very small portion of slaveholders who forced a largely slaveless group of poor white people to go fight for slavery. It was all an elaborate con. And so the Lost Cause isn't technically correct, but it is going to shape the thinking of white Southerners in the first 3 decades of the 20th century, giving them an idea about a justification for Jim Crow segregation, an idea about justification for denying black voting rights, black men at first, and then after 1920, black women as well, and for more insidious things like debt peonage work, where indigent black workers around the area are given fines, and their fines are paid off by wealthy white farmers, and then they are forced to go work off their fine at that farmer's plantation. It is precisely a situation like that, justified by monuments, that's going to end up creating the uprising that will give us the Mary Turner lynching 7 years after we get our monument. So all of these things work together, and none of them, frankly, really have anything specifically to do with the Civil War itself. They are using the Civil War to deal with very 20th century problems.